Story recapped here. Today I'm going to explain a drama, sci-fi, and horror film called The Twilight Zone: A Human Face. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. During one gloomy day in a quaint suburban neighborhood, the local radio news forecast the passing of a cosmic flare in the afternoon, possibly through the Earth, which may result in a bit of a light show. The other host laughs, asking whether people should get in their storm cellars. So the main host assures everyone that scientists have confirmed that there is absolutely no cause for alarm. Right after, they go back to playing some regular tunes at the station. In one of the homes, a couple prepares to move out. Barbara calls out to her husband, Robert, trying to find him inside the house. Seeing him inside their daughter's room disassembling a bed frame, Barbara asks why he's dealing with that when they already called movers to handle everything. Robert just reminds her that the movers charge by the hour. Finally, Barbara tells Robert that the phone isn't working, so Robert explains that it's because their internet was shut off. Unsatisfied with his answer, Barbara clarifies that it's the phone that isn't working, not the connection. So Robert explains that the phone works on the internet because it's a bundle. Barbara then looks around the room and sees the posters on the wall, including a wacky picture of their deceased daughter, Maggie. With a chuckle, Barbara comments that Maggie was always so scattered, but Robert disagrees. Barbara clarifies her comment, saying she meant Maggie was all over the place. Upon seeing a box of Maggie's private sentiments, Barbara looks through it and picks up a heart-shaped paper labeled Mags Only. Just then, the radio starts glitching, catching the two's attention as a high-pitched whoosh accompanies a moving ray of light from outside. At the same time, their own electrical system malfunctions, shutting off their lights. Right away, Barbara asks what that was, so Robert comments on the weirdness. Before they can move, a clattering noise from downstairs startles the two. Immediately, they head down the basement, but stop by the top of the stairs as they realize that the lights aren't working. So Robert gets a flashlight. After procuring the flashlight, they tread the stairs together and look around the basement. When they don't see anything, Barbara wonders whether the noise came from outside. Just then, a sudden thud makes her gasp, so they follow the source of the noise. Inching slowly further into the basement, their eyes land on a slimy, semi-translucent alien munching on their table. The two stare in a mix of shock, confusion, and horror as Barbara questions Robert about what it is. Unfortunately, Robert is just as confused as her. Noticing the two, the alien turns toward them before it screeches, making them run back upstairs. In the apparent safety of their attic, the two discuss what they just saw. Right away, Barbara asks if Robert saw the alien's eyes, but Barbara refers to it as a she, so Robert doesn't know what she's talking about. When Barbara mentions that the alien looked at them, Robert notices that Barbara is referring to the alien as a she, so he asks why she does so. When Barbara doesn't respond immediately, Robert kneels in front of her to ask if she's okay, reminding her that they need to keep it together. Barbara points out that Robert saw it too, and repeatedly says that it was her. Robert denies such assumptions, saying the news warned them about the cosmic flare, and the creature must have come with it, like a wave that leaves something on the shore. Robert then catches Barbara looking at a picture of Maggie on her phone, so he reminds her that there's an alien in their basement. Still, Barbara is insistent on what she saw, so Robert points out that it didn't look like Maggie. Trying to make her see reason, Robert tells Barbara that they need to call the cops. However, Barbara rambles about her delusions, saying there was something there even if it didn't fully look like Maggie. When Barbara insists that Robert saw it and that it was Maggie, Robert loses his cool. Still, Barbara declares that she's not leaving the house. To check once more, the two go down to the basement again. This time, Robert shouts as he goes down to scare the creature. They see the chewed table on the ground but no sign of the creature. Hearing a sound in one of the doors, they go straight to it and see the alien hiding behind a wooden table. Barbara asks whether it's Maggie, but Robert tells her that Maggie is dead. Seeing the two, the alien starts walking toward them, but its grotesque body begins to shapeshift, trying to copy Maggie's likeness, and even calls after Barbara with their daughter's voice. Backing away, Robert tells Barbara not to listen to it, but soon, the creature takes Maggie's form, albeit a bit translucent. Hopeful, Barbara calls out to her, but the creature's face morphs back into its own and screeches at them. In shock, Robert falls, hurting his wrist as Barbara assists him back upstairs. In the hallway, the alien Maggie goes through the floor, blocking their path, so they lock themselves in the bathroom. While Robert recuperates, Barbara starts blocking the door crack, hoping to keep the creature out. Now seeing what the creature could do, Robert tries to convince Barbara that the creature isn't Maggie, simply taking her shape like camouflage. However, Barbara points out that the alien looked so much like her. Robert doesn't give up on convincing Barbara otherwise, saying it would be bad if it did look like Maggie. Robert explains that they don't know what that thing is, but it wants them to think it's Maggie, and tricking them is a bad thing in general. Furthermore, Robert compares it to a predator trying to trick their prey, like an anglerfish. However, Barbara asks what if it's Maggie's ghost, making Robert frustrated. Not giving up, Barbara asks if her conclusion is any crazier than the creature being an alien, so Robert says yes. Laying out all his points again, Robert enumerates the capabilities of the alien, such as changing shape and copying voices. He gets cut off when they hear the alien knocking on the door. With Maggie's voice, the creature calls out to the two, asking why they won't let her in. While Barbara is affected by her emotions, Robert tries to make her see the logic behind it all. First, the creature takes Maggie's physical form. Then, it learns how to act and speak like her. Although Barbara says she understands the concept, that doesn't make her any less emotional about it. Outside, the alien keeps talking like Maggie, but it merely repeats sentences that don't connect. Robert points this out, telling Barbara that it's like a computer. Despite saying that she knows it's not really Maggie, Barbara says it's still nice to hear her voice. The longer they stay inside the bathroom, the more the alien Maggie is able to learn different sentences to say and appeal to the two's emotions, especially Barbara's. The alien Maggie starts to cry, saying she feels weird and can't breathe. Robert shouts for her to shut up, saying they know she's not Maggie. However, Barbara can't stop herself any further and goes to the door. Opening it, she sees the alien Maggie sitting on the floor, crying and asking for help. In the dining room, Barbara scrambles to get food for the alien. Robert asks what she's doing, so Barbara explains that Maggie must be scared because she came back and her parents didn't recognize her. When Robert chooses to see the logical side of things, Barbara rebuts that Robert never listens. He argues that he does, but Barbara insists on living in a fantasy world. Looking at the alien Maggie, Barbara says she'll comfort her because she needs their help, even when Robert reminds her that there are no do-overs in the real world. Just when Barbara tries to walk to the alien, they realize that she's gone, so Robert looks for her in the basement while Barbara looks upstairs. However, the alien is in Maggie's room, looking through the deceased girl's private belongings. Meanwhile, Barbara looks at their old family portrait, noticing how Maggie isn't smiling in it. Downstairs, Robert comes across a slimy liquid on the bitten wooden table. Upon inspection, the slimy liquid comes alive in Robert's hand and jumps away. Afterward, Robert goes to Barbara and tells her that they should take the opportunity to run while the alien is preoccupied. However, Barbara says she got it all wrong, and they can't leave now. Amidst Barbara's babbles, Robert tells her about the alien slime, but instead of responding to him, Barbara points out how Robert never saw what Maggie was going through. Heartbroken, Barbara says that she tried to be there for Maggie. When Robert asks whether Barbara's blaming him, Barbara angrily exclaims that Maggie was their daughter and she needed them. Robert fires back, saying Barbara was too lenient on Maggie, which could have also been part of the problem. Angered, Barbara blames Robert for giving up, but Robert insists that he didn't because he wanted to have another child. With that, Barbara points out how Robert just wants to replace Maggie. Finding her statement hypocritical, Robert argues that Barbara is now trying to replace Maggie with the alien. However, Barbara says she needs to heal and be there for Maggie, even when Robert tries to reason with her that the alien isn't their daughter. So Barbara says she doesn't care. Robert tells Barbara that while she continues to blame him, Barbara never saw her own faults, her messiness and craziness. With his statement, alien Maggie appears behind them. Hearing their entire argument, Maggie argues that she doesn't like the way Robert talks to Barbara. However, Robert doesn't want to listen to her because she isn't actually Maggie. Furthermore, Robert tells her that the real Maggie never complained about how he talked to Barbara. Maggie says she didn't complain because she was a child, but she never liked the way he talked to her mother. When Maggie calls him dad, Robert gets angrier, telling her not to call him that. He asks who or what she is, so Barbara tries to defuse the situation. Still, Robert doesn't stop shouting and blames Barbara for painting him as a bad father. Maggie comments that Robert was never a father. He was just a guy that happened to have a kid. Barbara stops her, saying she didn't mean that, so Maggie plays dumb, saying she was always so scattered. Turning to Barbara, Maggie asks why Barbara thinks she's absent-minded, wondering if it's because if Maggie had been absent-minded, then the pills must have been an accident. She concludes that Barbara needed it to be that Maggie had no idea what she was doing because Barbara couldn't just ask what she was going through. With the tables turned on her, Barbara says the alien isn't Maggie. While pointing out their flaws as parents, Maggie recalls how Barbara fawned over her and Robert hid from her, but neither of them really saw who she was. In disbelief, Barbara asks what she is, so Maggie says she doesn't know, and they should tell her. After their family outburst, Maggie locks herself in her room while the two sit outside, brewing over the hurtful words that have been thrown. While Barbara wallows over her mistakes, Robert tries to assure her that the creature was lying. However, Barbara is convinced that there's some truth in it. Sitting next to Barbara, Robert comforts her that even if there are some buried truths that have been brought up, the past can't hurt them anymore because they've dealt with it. In doubt, Barbara asks if they've been able to, so Robert says they should. Helping her up, Robert tells Barbara that they lost Maggie, but they have to leave and move on. After a moment of clarity, they decide to leave as Robert points out that the creature might change tactics after it realizes it can't trick them anymore. However, Maggie overhears this and exits the room as Robert questions her identity. She reveals that she's a biological pacification drone and wants to talk to them about what she is. Maggie explains that she's some sort of tool or weapon that alternates between 2.726 and 3.73 dimensions at all times, so she isn't even entirely there. She started as a machine for conquest with barely a sentience, and that she is an aspect of an invading force. Although she mentions that those aren't really the best ways to put it, she continues to explain. Revealing that her function is indigenous pacification, Maggie says it requires adaptation to match local patterns, hence why she took Maggie's form, including her memories and mind. Confused, Robert asks her to expound, so Maggie explains that when she started to act more like their daughter and tapped into their messy family dynamic, it affected the two the most and hooked them even when it hurt. Pointing out her words, Robert tells Barbara that Maggie is full on admitting that she's trying to trick them. Barbara tells him to stop, wanting to listen more to Maggie, who says she felt their love when they started acting like she was really their daughter. Despite her initial purpose, Maggie says she got lost in their daughter's identity and wants to know who she really is and seek the truth. Thus, she declares that she has abandoned her mission of conquest. Walking towards her, Barbara tells Maggie that she's here for her now, saying she loves her. Accepting the alien into her life, Barbara holds Maggie's hand as she returns to the translucent form and leads Barbara to the door. Even when Robert reasons that she isn't Maggie, pleading for her to see clarity, Barbara no longer listens to him. Following them downstairs, Robert tries to attack the alien, but gets pushed away. Desperate, Robert points out how it's one big con and the alien pretty much just explained it to them. But Barbara is convinced that there's no con, and that the alien said she abandoned the mission. Robert still doubts it, saying the alien might just be lying. As the alien turns back to Maggie's form, looking at Robert, he points out that she's targeting their weakness, love. The alien points out that even if she's not actually Maggie, she has their daughter's mind. When she mentions that she knows that Maggie loved him, Robert tears up, finally breaking the last straw of his resolution. He accepts her embrace, and the three go out as a family, joining other families who happily reunite with other lost loved ones.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.